Hello, my name is Gurpreet Dhillon and I'm a professor of information systems at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. The topic of our discussion today is organizational competence and information technology and how we can leverage information technology to be more competent. I refer to this whole concept as information systems competence. In any business organization, there is change taking place. There are business changes taking place, and it is these business changes which are forcing us to begin thinking about what kind of abilities do we need in order to be successful. I classify those changes into four categories. There are changes in the operational processes, there are changes in the support processes, there's rethinking of how information flows in an organization, and there are changing network processes. Let's talk about each one of those in a little bit more detail. When I refer to changing operational processes, these are largely because the cycle times have decreased, there is increased customer service, and there is decreased cost as well. The combination of decreased cycle times, increased customer service, and our ability to leverage customer relationship management systems, and of course the cost aspect, brings in some fundamental changes in the operational processes. The changes in support processes are essentially because of inefficiencies in cost and inefficiencies in the service that we deliver, and rethinking of information flows as a consequence of the centralization and the decentralization of the organization structures, how the organizations change over a period of time, whether they are more centralized, whether they're more decentralized, and it all depends upon the environment and the context in which you are. We've gone from typical hierarchical organizations to more decentralized matrix and network kind of operations, and that is rightly so, and depends upon the kind of an industry, kind of the context, kind of an environment in which we live in. And then finally, you have the changing network processes, which are essentially consequences of cost-effective communication and customer connections. And these, in turn, help us understand all these business changes. There's several examples out there in the world as far as each of those changes are concerned. And one can just begin thinking about companies such as Walmart and also all the just-in-time kind of implementations. So these changes, the four kind of changes that we're talking about, interplay with each other. You have changes in the information flows, which have an impact on how the sales management is going to take place, how the planning and quality of inventory is going to take place. You have the changes in network processes, which are essentially coordination activities, where the goods are coming from, where the goods are going, how you're coordinating in a marketplace. And changes in network processes also are information-based services. There's certain services which are now essentially information products. Information is a commodity there, and that affects how network processes take shape. Changes in operational processes are largely around new product developments, the logistics, and how we are managing the logistics more efficiently and effectively. Changes in support services and support processes are about accounting, HR, and IT, and how they are integrating or not integrating, and how they are getting dispersed. So there's typically a lot of changes taking place in that particular space. There are technological changes as well in an organization and an institution. Distributed computing may it be, to cloud computing, what we have today, to new development methods that we come up with as to how new technologies are going to be taking shape. There are wonderful examples of companies identifying their systematic position given the changes in the business environment and the technological concepts. There are many banks. There's one particular bank that we always talk about, Capital One, in the US, which does not consider itself to be a bank anymore. It's more like a technology company. So what are you really competing with? Is Amazon really a retail company, or is it about Amazon Web Services that they're trying to sell, or is it something more in terms of giving security certifications which is a new line of business that Amazon has started. So given the technological advances, there are many companies which kind of rediscover themselves given the advances. Exporting technologies sometimes become very disruptive, or technology which they never thought is going to help them establish themselves in business suddenly becomes the main line of business. New industries come into being. Availability of outside suppliers helps. The global supply chains are a perfect example how things are being produced in one country and then shipped off to the other, and just in time, really. So technological changes certainly drive organizations to rethink about what their abilities are and what kind of organizational processes they need to put in place. One needs to think about organization competence really in terms of two fundamental concepts, and which is our understanding of what skill sets we have and our understanding of what the business processes are. The unique combination between organization processes and the skills gives rise to what I call emergent competence. So there's an idiosyncratic combination between my ability to understand what my organizational processes are and my ability to understand what skill sets do I need in a given context, and the idiosyncratic combination is the emergent organization competence. Now, interestingly, competence is one of those things which you cannot see, you cannot measure it. The only measure of competence is outwardly driven. It's always the rent, it's always the result of the competence that you have. So you might be measuring increased market share, which you can then link it back to certain sets of competencies that an organization might have. So you can't really measure the competence, but you can measure the rent, which is the outcome of the competence. So it's very interesting to see when we start talking about competence, and we always say you got to build these competencies, but we never think about how I'm going to be measuring these competencies. Now, there are 8 imperatives that need to be thought about in terms of building good competence, and I will talk about a little bit about the competencies in a little bit. So the 8 imperatives that I like thinking about, which are essential, are achieving a two-way strategic alignment between what information technology has to offer and where the business is going. Now, interestingly, over the years, the differentiation between where the business wants to go and how we can build an IT infrastructure are becoming very difficult to separate. There is hardly any difference between the business strategy and the IT strategy, as opposed to what it was 10-20 years ago. So there is clearly an increased need for a two-way strategic alignment between information technology and business strategies today, more than ever before. Then is the question of developing an effective relationship with the line management. Now, this sounds very archaic that there is actually a line management, but they are the first responders in any organization. If you think about, if you're in a retail business, they are the people who are at the front end in terms of building the relationships with their customers. Information technology can only do so much. A customer relationship management system can only do so much. But to have an effective relationship between the line management, people who are delivering the services, let's say in a retail sector, and where our intent is of taking the organization is very, very important. Delivering and implementing new systems, so you might have a certain system, a CRM system or an ERP system, which is a key operational system for an organization. Where are we going from there? What is our next move? Where do we see us differentiating from the rest of the world? Any key operational system essentially gives you parity. It does not give you a competitive advantage. So where is this new system? Where are we going to be building this new system, and where is it going to be coming from? What aspect of the business it's going to be focusing on? Now, it goes without saying that building and managing infrastructure is fundamental to us achieving some kind of a strategic advantage. So it's very important to do that. So that's an ability that we need to inculcate of building and managing our current infrastructure. Another aspect that needs some careful consideration is reskilling the IT organization. Now, given the speed of change and how institutions evolve over a period of time, it becomes increasingly important for managers, for people to understand what kind of skill sets do they have right now and where they are going. What am I going to be needing in 5 years' time? What kind of a skill set do I need? What kind of programmers do I need? What kind of abilities do I need? How do I manage the cloud transitions, and where do I see those cloud transitions going in 5 years or 7 years or even less than that in a year's time? What is it that I should be looking at in the next generation, and how am I going to transition myself from where I am to where I want to be? And that is all about reskilling the IT organization, and that is an ability in itself. It's a competence that needs to be built into organizations. Now, in the older structures, we always talked about vendor relationships. There are obviously people supplying stuff to you, and when we had the advent of the EDI, the electronic data interchanges, we did talk about vendor relationships and how one company, the larger company, could have a relationship with a vendor and how well they integrated into their supply chain systems. And we used to give the example of Bosch and BMW as being two heavyweight players, but one integrating to the other, and the supply chains being integrated with each other. It has become even more important today because you're not necessarily talking about one vendor, you're talking about multiple vendors, as is the case with Dell. They have multiple vendors who are coming in from different sources, or Apple for that matter. And how do you manage this network of vendor relationships? What kind of an ability do you need? That's a skill set in itself, and that's a competence that needs to be built as we go forward. And then, of course, high performance is what we need, and given all these complexities, what kind of a high performance do we need to have in place? And then finally, information technology is no longer centralized. We don't have an IT department per se in any institutions. It's all federated, it's all over the place. And how do we redesign and manage that federated IT systems and IT organization is an issue of concern and careful consideration. So these are 8 imperatives that become very important for us to think through in order to build organization competence such that information technology can be harnessed appropriately. There are 7 fundamental competencies that our research has shown which are absolutely critical for us to build. These include the ability to consider future options with respect to IT use, ability to engage in information technology planning, ability to set information technology standards, ability to ensure that we have a compliance with these standards, ability to decide between custom design applications or the use of packages, the ability to link current and future IT use with business processes, both new and old, ability to facilitate behavioral enrichment. So these are 7 fundamental competencies that need to be thought about very carefully. Now, if you think about each of these 7 competencies, ability to consider future options with respect to information technology use, interestingly, what we saw is there's a piece of work I did with John Brown Engineering, which was an engineering and construction firm. And in this organization, the CEO proposed a strategic vision that was concerned with developing a global capability to leverage expertise. At the same time, it was however difficult for this particular organization to recognize that the current IT systems were, how the advances could be brought into place, and what was not in position for the CEO to realize his vision. This resulted in a concurrent effort which created a new IT infrastructure to support the strategic plan. So work kept moving from one country to the other 24-hour office. That was a good example of a company's ability to consider future options with respect to information technology use, because end of the day what they wanted was really have a good ability to bid on large engineering and construction projects, and they had to move the work around. Now, being way back in the league tables, the new IT infrastructure enabled John Brown Engineering to move up in the league tables and be very, very competitive in the world. Ability to engage in IT planning is another interesting one, and this is an ability which allows you to undertake IT planning in a more proactive way. Having the right skilled people is important. However, unless there is a concurrent process that enables the plan to be realized or aligned, there is bound to be a concern in realizing this particular vision. Our third competence is about ability to set IT standards. This is an important one. Unless or until an organization is in a position to assess their current state of IT services and compare it with industry benchmarks, it will not be in a position to make any improvements. As a consequence, there is no reference monitor. In the field of information technology service delivery, essentially because of the rapid technological changes, there are very few standards, limited number of standards. Therefore, organizations need to constantly understand the evolving nature of technologies and the business processes to support the technologies, and hence have the ability to establish generally accepted practices. There's some work that I did with the Nevada DMV and their large-scale Project Genesis, the IT system that they implemented. And in that, we found that an ability of the organization to suitably scan the environment and adopt adequate standards results in good competence. And if you don't have it, you're going to have reduced competence or lack of competence on two levels. First, in the design of the systems, and the second in supporting the users when things do go wrong, and which they did go wrong in the case of Nevada DMV. Then you have the ability to ensure compliance to the standards. Setting standards is one thing. Having an ability to comply with the standards is a second issue. We did some work with some casino gaming software firms, and although we found there's a highly regulated environment in the casino industry, although there are a large number of standards that were adopted or developed internally, the organization generally lacked the ability to ensure compliance. And as a result, you end up in a lot of firefighting, and tasks are not completed on time because you're essentially playing catch up. The ability to decide between custom designed applications or packages, another interesting one, and this is an ability that most organizations lack. As a consequence, wrong choices for systems are made. This usually results in problems that occur at two levels. First, besides the monetary loss that obviously takes place, it becomes very difficult to configure the newly acquired systems to fit in with the existing organization. And since this lack of fit and compatibility of these systems and organizations exists, service delivery to the users gets compromised. Although this may seem that the ability to decide between what needs to be custom designed and where packages could be used would have little impact on service delivery, our research really found that there was in fact a very strong relationship between our ability to think in terms of custom designing and where packages should be used, and that is a unique skill set that you also need, our ability to understand and differentiate between where we just build or buy, as the decision used to be in the olden days. Then we have the ability to link current and future ITUs with business processes, may they be new or old. Oftentimes what we see is that IT systems are adopted and future use is planned without any due consideration to the current procedures and business processes. It's very easy to design something new, but to fit something new into what we already have in an institution is challenging. It has been found in a number of cases, and there's one particular piece of work that we did with Reuters when they were doing big business change projects of segmenting their news house into small chunks of news which would automatically be put together into news stories. And we found that if consideration is first given to the process of delivering services and products and ITUs is considered as a consequence, then the applications tend to have a higher degree of success. This has a knock-on effect on the manner in which IT services are delivered within an organization. And then finally, we talk about behavioral enrichment, which is a skill and ability in itself. Behavioral skills are one of the most important enabling factors to ensure successful deployment of information technology. Training IT staff on business skills and user training on desktop management skills or whatever they might be are very relevant and enable healthy assimilation of information technology. But the underlying theme of such education should result in appreciation of each other's discipline, which is equally important in maintaining good use of IT user relationships. So in a final synthesis, what we see is a network of organization competencies. You have a bunch of fundamental competencies, which our research has identified 7, and then you have several facilitating competencies. This particular graphic shows a network of competencies that are absolutely essential for any institutions to think through, to develop practices around these competencies as to how these competencies can then eventually be realized in an organizational setting. One has to think in terms of combinations of competencies. Certain combinations of competencies become more strategic for an institution. Others are more what I call supply oriented, because they are essentially helping manage the infrastructure. And then there is the final category of these network of competencies, which are more exploitational in nature. How do I take advantage of the strategic competencies that I have built in my institution and then link them with the supply kind of competencies and hence achieve an advantageous position in the marketplace. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and I look forward to an engaging discussion. Thank you very much.